Hey guys, JP Kuhlman here. It's really neat we get to do this retreat together. Hopefully it's been fruitful. Hopefully everyone's gotten something out of it and the Holy Spirit's been able to move in your heart the way He desires. And in this little session, I really want to focus on the story that has stayed with me over the years. I heard it a couple years ago from a priest giving a homily. I think it was Father Mike Schmitz. He gives some beautiful homilies. And he told a story about these sisters that had come to visit him in Minnesota where he lives. And these sisters were members of the convent where St. Faustina, who began the Divine Mercy Chaplet, the image of Divine Mercy, she's known for that. And she was a member of these sisters in Poland. And these sisters who were visiting Minnesota a couple years ago, they told Father Mike this story. So years ago in the 1940s, might have been the 1930s, I'm not sure, around there was this man in a hospital, very sick, and there was this priest who was there in the hospital visiting patients. And one of the nuns, one of the sisters that worked at the hospital, grabbed the priest and said, "Father, you got to come see this guy. He's about to die. He's old. He's struggling with his faith. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's so upset. He's angry. He's bitter." And the priest's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll go see this guy. That's why I'm here." So but then the sister warns him, "Well, listen, there have been other people who tried to see him, and he doesn't want to see anybody. He's actually said he doesn't want to see a priest." And the priest who's being asked to go see him, he's like, well, then why are you asking me? He doesn't want to see a priest. And the sister's saying, "Father, you got to go see him. Come on, let's go, follow me." And you know how a good sister who loves people, they can be pretty persistent. So he grabs Father. He's like, "Father, you got to go see this guy." So she drags him to the hospital room, and he's thinking, "Okay, I'm just going to go in and out, and that's going to be it." So he goes in. He sees the guy lying in his bed. Older man, you could tell he's really sick, near death. And the man gets upset. He says, "Get out of here. I don't want to see you." So the priest's like, okay. So he leaves, and the sister asks him, "Father, how did it go in there?" He's like, I only spent 30 seconds in there. He didn't go well. And so the sister was like, "Father, you got to get back in there. This guy needs you. He needs the sacraments before he dies." And the priest is like, "Sister, no, he doesn't want to see me. He's made that clear. He just kicked me out of his room." And I couldn't be more clear. And the sister, again and again, I love good sisters who are so persistent. I love it. Sister Christy, keep doing this if you're watching. And the sister says, "Father, you got to go back in there." And the priest says, "All right, I'll try again, just because the sister's making me." And he goes in and he knocks on the door, and the guy just looks at him, and the priest looks at him, and the priest is probably freaking out. I can only imagine just not being wanted in there. And the priest comes in, and he's like, "Hey, I won't say anything. Can I just sit in your room, and I'll just kind of pray over here in the corner?" And the man looks at him and he says, "Yeah, Father, just don't, as long as you don't talk to me, you can stay there." And the priest goes in, and he's like, "All right." So he goes and sits there. He takes out his rosary beads. He starts to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, to himself, not out loud. The guy would have been pretty upset. But the man in the hospital bed, he stays there, he hangs out, and he's quiet and minding his own business. And after a while, the priest, after he's praying for a little while, he asks the guy's name. He's like, "What's your name?" And the guy just kind of gives him short answers. He just tells him his name, And the priest's like, "Okay. Yeah, wow." It's like, "Where are you from?" So he starts this small talk, this conversation, and the guy just keeps giving these one-word answers. And after a while, the priest starts to learn a little bit more about this guy. And he sees he's about the same age. He's looking at his age. He's like, this guy's only a little bit older than me. And he realizes that they cross paths a few times in certain areas of Poland. And the priest asks him, "Tell me about your life a little bit. What'd you do?" And the guy starts to open up. And eventually, after a while, the priest, just this small talk, opens this pathway to talking to this man who's on his deathbed. And the man starts to tell the priest, "Listen, Father, I'm Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, but I haven't been to church in over 40 years. That I haven't wanted to talk to a priest or prayed or been to the sacraments in so long, I don't remember what to say." And he said, and the priest was just listening and taking all this in, and it kind of asked him to go deeper. And the man said, "Listen, when I was younger, I was working in this railroad system, where he would be the one to move the railroad tracks up and down. If there was a train coming, he would put the gates down so that cars didn't go in the way of the train tracks, so they didn't get on the train tracks to get hit by a train." And so he said, "One night I went out drinking with some buddies, and I drank a little too much. I was drunk, and didn't know my right from my left." And he went to work that night. He worked the night shift. And he said, "I fell asleep and I didn't know where I was or anything. I was so discombobulated, and a train came, and I wasn't there to press the button to put the gates down in the road. And a car got in the way of the train, and it got leveled by the train. And that night a family died, a mom, a dad, and 2 siblings." And the priest is listening to this, just crying, just oh my gosh, his heart being broken by this guy's story, this like feeling what he went through 40 years before. And the guy says, listen, but that's not the worst part. The mom, the dad, and the siblings died, but there was one child that wasn't in the car with him, a little boy, a son. And that night, because of what I did, that boy lost his mom, his dad, and his 2 siblings. And he will have to live the rest of his life alone because of what I did, because of my mistakes. And he said, you know what, Father? This man on the deathbed, he said, you know what? God doesn't have mercy for me. God doesn't have time to forgive me. He doesn't have any plan for me. That right there defined who I am, my life. And I'm ready to go on with my life knowing that. And the priest is just heartbroken hearing this story. But the man notices the priest, his figure and his face change as he's telling the story. And the priest starts to ask him more questions. He's like, what town was that in? So the man tells him. And the priest starts to ask him, like, what was the date that happened? And the man tells him what date and what night it was. And the priest starts to get, even more emotional. And he looks at the man and he says, listen, that same night in that same town, I was a little boy. And I lost my dad, my mom, and my 2 siblings because the train ran them over on the tracks because of a man not doing his job at the railroad station. And as soon as he said that, the man's heart just opened and the floodgates were open. And this man, he had spent his whole life thinking about that boy that his life he had ruined. This life, he left him an orphan. Who knows what would have happened to him the rest of his life. And that man opened up to that priest and said, Father, I'm so sorry. And the priest just told him, listen, that was me that night. And my life was in God's hands. And God knew what he was doing. He's brought me here. He called me to be a priest. He's brought me throughout my ministry to this hospital. He brought me into this room to meet you before you die, to give you the sacraments. And he heard that man's confession. He gave him the Eucharist for the last time. And this man was able to die in peace, in grace, knowing that God's mercy was so much greater than any mistake he had made in his life. And the reason that story stayed with me so much is think about this man who, after that one mistake in his life, living it without God, living it in just this anger and this resentment that was probably always there. He probably pushed it down so much, but it was always present. And it was really revealed when he was near his death, and he just didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to talk to anybody, just an angry person. And how God had waited these 40 years to bring that boy. He knew what he was doing, to take this mistake that this man made, this terrible mistake, this sin, this failure, and to make it into this beautiful act of mercy that would change that man's life. And that priest left that hospital room, and he came back out looking for the sister. He's like, where's that sister? Like, she was so inspired to have me enter that room. And the nurses were like, we don't have a sister here. What are you talking about? There's no nuns here. And he was like, yeah, that sister just pushed me into the room. And he couldn't find her anywhere. Asking around, nobody knew her. And years later, he went to that convent of the Sisters of St. Faustina. He looked up on the wall, and he saw a picture of that nun. And he said, that's the nun who pushed me into that room. And it was St. Faustina, who had died years before. It was just this miracle that she had appeared to him and pushed him into that room. And how he had been this instrument of mercy. But that story for me has just rung true over the years. That same thing that the good thief on the cross, his whole life spent in misery, spent for himself, spent in sin and failure, and these mistakes over and over again, leading him away from God. But that one moment, that one gaze up at Jesus, when Jesus' heart is pierced, and he says to Jesus, remember me when you enter in your kingdom. Because all Jesus needs is that crack. Sometimes we're so scared to give him that crack into our hearts because we hold on so tightly to what the way we think he sees us, or our mistakes, or our life the way it is. And we think God doesn't want to see that. But all he needs is a little crack, just like that good thief. And St. Therese of Lisieux says, if you combine all the sins of the world, every sin of every person throughout all of history, and you crumbled it into a little ball, and you threw it into a fire, it would be like putting a drop of water into a fiery inferno. How it's nothing compared to the mercy and love of God for each one of us. So may that story hopefully inspire you like it's inspired me, to remind us that his mercy and his love for us is so intimate, so personal, so special to each one of us, and that he always carries us in his heart. And then that what we receive in baptism, to be marked as his children, never changes, no matter what we do. For all eternity, that's our identity. His beloved children, his beloved daughters and sons. So hopefully that inspires you, that story, as much as it did me. And hopefully this retreat is fruitful for you. And hopefully the Spirit moves and leads you closer to His heart and reminds you each and every day of that truth, the truth of who you are in His eyes. So God bless. Hope you have a great retreat, and we're praying for you.